I pulled into the driveway at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, still wearing the scrubs I'd been living in for the past 9 months. My hands smelled like antiseptic and airplane coffee. The cab driver asked if I wanted help with my bags, but I barely heard him. I was staring at my apartment building. Specifically, I was staring at the third floor, where every single window was dark. Not unusual for midnight, except the curtains were gone. The shelves I'd built into the window frames, the ones that held my grandmother's ceramic birds, were empty. And taped to the front entrance of the building was a notice from a construction company announcing renovations on Unit 3B, my unit. Before I tell you what I found inside that apartment and the one phone call that turned this entire nightmare into their worst mistake, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I want to see how far this story reaches. I didn't panic. 9 months running a field clinic in rural Honduras teaches you that panic is a performance, not a strategy. When a kid comes in with a machete wound, and you're the only doctor within 40 miles, you don't get the luxury of freezing. You assess, you prioritize, and you act. So that's what I did. I grabbed my duffel bag, paid the driver, and walked toward the building with the same measured steps I used walking into a trauma bay. My name is Elena. I'm 31 years old. I'm an emergency physician, and until 9 months ago, I was working a comfortable rotation at a level 1 trauma center in Charlotte. Then I got an offer from a medical relief organization to lead a small team in Honduras. It was supposed to be 6 months. It turned into 9. The work was brutal, the conditions were primitive, and every single day I questioned whether I'd made the right call. But I kept going because the people there needed me, and because for the first time in my adult life, nobody was asking me to save anyone in my own family. I need to explain that last part because it's important. My mother, Linda, raised me and my older sister, Vanessa, alone after our father left when I was 4. Linda worked 2 jobs for most of my childhood, and I will never take that away from her. She sacrificed. She struggled. She kept the lights on. But somewhere along the way, sacrifice became currency. Everything she ever did for us came with an invoice, and the bill always came due at the worst possible time. Vanessa was 5 years older than me and had been in trouble since high school. Not the kind of trouble you grow out of, the kind that grows with you. She started with scratch-offs and poker nights, and by her mid-20s, she was driving to the casino 3 times a week, maxing out credit cards she'd opened in our mother's name, borrowing from friends until she had no friends left, and then borrowing from people who weren't interested in friendship. Every time she hit bottom, Linda would call me. Not Vanessa. Me. Because I was the one with the career, the savings account, the stability. I was the responsible one, which in my family meant I was the one who paid. I bought my apartment when I was 26. It was a 2-bedroom in a converted mill building in the Noda district. Nothing flashy, but it was mine. I paid for it with 5 years of emergency room overtime, holiday shifts nobody else wanted, and a lifestyle so frugal my colleagues thought I was either broke or eccentric. The day I signed the closing papers, I sat on the bare floor of the empty living room and cried. Not because I was sad. Because for the first time in my life, I had something that was entirely mine. No one else's name on it, no one else's debt attached to it, just mine. Linda told me I was selfish for buying property when Vanessa was struggling to keep her lights on. She said a real family shares. She said I was turning my back on blood. I heard that speech so many times I could recite it in my sleep. But I kept the apartment because I knew, with the certainty of someone who has watched addiction destroy people on the operating table, that there is no amount of money you can give an addict that will fix them. You're not filling a hole. You're feeding it. Before I left for Honduras, I did something that my mother and sister would later call paranoid, controlling, and cruel. I called it planning. I had watched Linda use a general power of attorney to access Vanessa's bank account years earlier, supposedly to help manage her finances. I watched how easily paper authority becomes real power when the person holding it has motivation and opportunity. So 48 hours before my flight, I sat down with a real estate attorney and transferred the title of my apartment from my personal name into an LLC. The Elena Reyes Properties, LLC. Single member. I was the sole managing member. The operating agreement required my personal, notarized signature for any sale, transfer, or encumbrance of the property. No power of attorney, no matter how broadly written, could override the LLC's operating agreement. I also signed a limited power of attorney for Linda, but only for medical decisions. If I came back in a body bag, she could authorize treatment or make end-of-life choices. That was it. Nothing about finances. Nothing about property. I made this crystal clear. I printed the limitations in bold. I highlighted them. I watched Linda's eyes skim over the restrictions the way Vanessa's eyes skimmed over credit card statements, seeing only what she wanted to see. I should have known then. The way she folded the paper and tucked it into her purse without asking a single question. The way she smiled and said, "Don't worry about a thing." Now I was standing in my hallway 9 months later, staring at a door that wasn't mine anymore. Except it was. I used my key. It still worked, but only because whoever changed the plan hadn't thought to change the deadbolt. The door swung open, and the smell hit me first. Fresh paint, new carpet, chemical cleanliness. The kind of sterile that only exists in places that have been scrubbed of someone's life. My apartment was empty. Not empty like I'd left it, with furniture under dust covers and my books boxed up in the closet. Empty like a showroom. The walls I'd painted a deep ocean blue, the color that reminded me of my grandmother's house in San Juan, were now a lifeless gray. The built-in bookshelves I'd installed myself, spending 3 weekends with a table saw and more YouTube tutorials than I care to admit, were ripped out. The kitchen, where I'd replaced every cabinet handle with hand-painted ceramic pulls I'd found at a flea market in Asheville, had been gutted and refitted with generic stainless steel. They hadn't just sold my home, they'd erased me from it. I stood in the middle of what used to be my living room, and I made one phone call. Not to my mother, not to a lawyer, to my building's property manager, Dave. Dave was a retired cop who ran the building with the efficiency of a precinct and the warmth of a golden retriever. He picked up on the second ring despite the hour. "Elena? I thought you weren't back until next week." "Change of plans, Dave. Quick question. Who authorized the renovation on 3B? The silence on his end told me everything. "Your mother came in about 4 months ago. She had paperwork. Said you'd decided to sell. She introduced a buyer, a developer named Paul Kraus. Does condo flips in the area. He paid cash. The whole thing moved fast. I should have called you. She said you were in a remote area with no phone access. She said you'd approved everything by email. Did you see the emails?" She showed me something on her phone. It looked legitimate. "Elena, I'm sorry." I hung up. I didn't blame Dave. Linda was convincing. She'd spent a lifetime perfecting the art of sounding reasonable while doing unreasonable things. She could make theft sound like a favor. She could make betrayal sound like love. I drove to Linda's house. It was almost 1 in the morning, but the lights were on. They were always on. Linda was a night owl, and Vanessa had never kept regular hours in her life. I parked on the street and walked up the path. Through the living room window, I could see them. Linda was on the couch watching television. Vanessa was at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone. And on Vanessa's wrist was a watch I'd never seen before. It was gold, chunky, expensive, the kind of accessory that screams new money and no taste. I stared at it through the glass and felt something cold settle behind my ribs. That watch was bought with the paint on my walls, with the shelves I'd built, with the ceramic pulls from Asheville. I knocked. Linda opened the door, and to her credit, she didn't even flinch. She looked at me with the practiced expression of a woman who had already rehearsed this conversation in her head 100 times. "You're home early," she said. "Where's my apartment, Linda?" She sighed. The kind of long, theatrical exhale designed to make the other person feel like they're being unreasonable. "Sit down, Elena. Let me explain." I didn't sit. I stood in her doorway like a stranger because that's what she'd made me. "Vanessa was in trouble again," Linda said, lowering her voice as if Vanessa couldn't hear from 10 feet away. "Real trouble this time. She owed $140,000 to people who don't send collection notices. They send other things." I had to act fast. "So you sold my apartment." "I used the power of attorney." She said it like reciting a recipe. "Paul offered $480,000 cash quick close. I used $140 to clear Vanessa's debt. The rest is in a secure account. It's still your money, Elena. I was protecting both of you." I looked past Linda to Vanessa, who hadn't moved from the kitchen table. She was watching me with an expression I'd seen before, the slightly bored, slightly defiant look of someone who has been rescued so many times she's forgotten what drowning feels like. "Nice watch," I said. Vanessa shrugged. "Mom said I could get something nice. After everything I've been through." The audacity of that sentence hit me like a physical blow. After everything she'd been through, not after everything she'd done. Not after the gambling, the debt, the stolen credit cards, the lies. After everything she'd been through, as if addiction were weather, as if it just happened to her while she stood there, innocent and unlucky. Linda saw my face and shifted tactics. She stepped closer, lowering her voice to the conspiratorial whisper she used when she wanted to recruit me into her version of reality. "The apartment was just sitting there, Elena. Empty. You were gone. You don't even know if you're coming back to Charlotte. Vanessa needed help right now. A building is just a building. Family is forever." I'd heard that speech 1,000 times. Family is forever, which meant my money was forever. My sacrifice was forever. My role as the family emergency fund was forever. But not anymore. How much did Paul pay total? I asked. 480. Cash, Linda said. It cleared 3 weeks ago. The money for the debt collectors is already sent. What's done is done, Elena. We can work this out. And the remaining 340,000? Linda hesitated for the first time. It's safe. I have it in an account. We can discuss how to divide it up. Divide it up. The words hung in the air like smoke. She wasn't even pretending anymore. She'd already decided my money was communal property. She'd already allocated portions in her head, probably earmarked some for Vanessa's next crisis, some for herself as a management fee for the trouble of stealing from me. I want to meet Paul, I said. It's 1 a.m, Elena. Then I'll meet him tomorrow. And Linda? Bring the paperwork. All of it. She agreed because she thought she was managing me. She thought this was the tantrum phase, and that if she gave me a night to sleep on it, I'd come around. I'd accept the loss, absorb the damage, and return to my position as the family safety net. She'd miscalculated. She'd mistaken my patience for weakness and my silence for consent. She was about to learn the difference. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in a hotel room 2 miles from my empty apartment and made 3 calls. The first was to my attorney, Diane Chen, who had handled the LLC formation. The second was to a forensic accountant I'd been referred to by a colleague whose ex-husband had hidden assets during their divorce. The third was to the FBI's field office in Charlotte, specifically the Financial Crimes Division. That one went to voicemail. I left a detailed message. I wasn't in a rush. The trap was already set. It had been set for 9 months. All I'd done was come home to spring it. The next afternoon, I met Paul Krause at a coffee shop near the apartment building. He was exactly what I expected. Mid-40s, expensive loafers, the kind of tan you get from a business trip to Miami, not from actual sun. He ordered a black coffee and set a manila folder on the table like a man who was used to closing deals over caffeine and handshakes. Linda was there too, sitting across from me with her purse on her lap and her jaw set in the expression she wore when she was prepared to be reasonable, which meant prepared to talk me out of being angry. Paul spoke first. Look, I understand this is a family situation, and I don't want to get in the middle of it. I purchased the unit in good faith. Your mother presented the paperwork. The power of attorney looked clean. I had my own lawyer review it. The sale is done. I've already started renovations. I nodded slowly. Let me see the deed. He slid it across the table. I read every line. Linda's signature was on the seller's line, signed as attorney in fact for Elena Reyes. It was notarized. It looked official. It looked bulletproof. It was worthless. I reached into my bag and pulled out 2 documents. The first was the LLC operating agreement for Elena Reyes Properties LLC, stamped and filed with the North Carolina Secretary of State 6 months before my deployment. The second was a certified copy of the property deed showing the transfer from Elena Reyes, individual, to Elena Reyes Properties LLC, recorded at the Mecklenburg County Register of Deeds 48 hours before I left the country. This apartment hasn't been in my personal name for over 9 months, I said. My voice was steady, calm, the voice I use when I'm telling a family their loved one didn't make it. Controlled, compassionate, absolute. My mother's power of attorney authorizes her to act on behalf of Elena Reyes, the individual. It does not grant her any authority over the LLC or its assets. She can't sell what she doesn't own. The signature on your deed is from a person who had no legal right to execute that transaction. This isn't a sale. It's forgery. And since the funds were wired across state lines, you're looking at federal wire fraud. Paul snatched the LLC agreement from the table. His eyes moved across the pages with the speed of a man watching his investment evaporate in real time. The color left his face in stages, starting at his forehead and draining down like someone had pulled a plug. He turned to Linda. You told me you had full authority. I do, Linda insisted, her voice climbing. I have the power of attorney. It says general authority. It covers everything. It covers medical decisions and personal accounts, I corrected. Read the limitation clause. Paragraph 4, subsection B. It does not extend to assets held by a separate legal entity. The LLC is not me. It's a company. You sold a property owned by a company you have no connection to. Paul stood up so fast his chair scraped across the floor. His composure crumbled like wet drywall. I want my money back. Every cent. Right now. Linda's face went white. She looked at me, then at Paul, then back at me. I can't, she whispered. The money for the debt collectors, it's already gone. I sent it the same day. What about the rest? Paul's voice was shaking. I paid $480,000. Linda swallowed hard. Some of it went to Vanessa, for expenses, and I had some debts of my own that needed. You spent it? Paul slammed his palm on the table. The coffee cups jumped. You stole my money and you spent it? That was the moment Linda's armor cracked. Not because she realized what she'd done was wrong, but because she realized she couldn't make it go away. This wasn't a conversation she could manage. This wasn't a daughter she could guilt into silence. This was a man who had lost almost $500,000 and was looking at her the way people look at someone they're about to sue into the ground. Elena? Linda turned to me, her voice shifting into that familiar, pleading register. You can fix this. Tell him it was a misunderstanding. Tell him you authorized it. I'm your mother. I was trying to help. Everything I did for this family. I looked at her. I really looked at her. And for the first time, I didn't see the woman who worked 2 jobs and kept the lights on. I didn't see the martyr or the hero. I saw a woman who had spent 30 years confusing love with control and sacrifice with ownership. A woman who genuinely believed that raising me entitled her to everything I'd ever earn, build, or become. You stopped being my mother when you treated me like an ATM, I said. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just stated a fact, the way you state a diagnosis. Clearly, without emotion, without room for negotiation. Paul was already on the phone with his lawyer. Linda was gripping the edge of the table with both hands, staring at a spot on the wall like she could will herself out of the room. I waited. My phone buzzed. It was Vanessa. I picked up. She didn't bother with hello. Mom just texted me. What are you doing? You're going to put your own mother in jail over an apartment? What is wrong with you? What's wrong with me? I repeated. Nothing. What's on your wrist? She went quiet. That watch you're wearing. How much was it? It was a gift, she said, but the defiance was gone. It was maybe $3,000. $3,000 of my money, spent on a gift for the person whose gambling addiction caused this entire disaster. And you're calling me to ask what's wrong with me. She hung up. I wasn't surprised. Vanessa had never been good at conversations she couldn't win. What happened next unfolded with the mechanical precision of a system designed to process exactly this kind of crime. Paul filed a police report that afternoon. His lawyer contacted the Mecklenburg County DA's office. Diane Chen, my attorney, submitted the LLC documents, the recorded deed transfer, and a detailed timeline proving Linda had no authority to execute the sale. The FBI called me back 2 days later. The wire transfer across state lines elevated this from a state property crime to a federal matter. Wire fraud, forgery, conspiracy to commit fraud. They arrested Linda on a Thursday morning. I know because Dave, the property manager, called to tell me. She was in her bathrobe, he said. She kept telling the agents there'd been a misunderstanding. She kept saying, call my daughter, she'll explain everything. I didn't explain anything. I let the documents speak. They picked up Vanessa the same day. Not for the property fraud directly, but for her role in spending the proceeds. Conspiracy, receiving stolen funds. The forensic accountant I'd hired traced every dollar. $140,000 to the gambling creditors. $62,000 to Vanessa's personal accounts. $18,000 in cash withdrawals from ATMs at 2 different casinos in the 3 weeks after the sale closed. She'd taken money stolen from my apartment and gambled with it. The poetry of that would have been funny if it hadn't been my life. The remaining money, about $280,000, was frozen in an account Linda had opened in her own name. Paul's lawyers were already moving to recover it, and he'd likely get most of it back. The gap, nearly $200,000, was gone. Gambled, spent, dissolved into the machinery of addiction and entitlement that had been consuming my family for as long as I could remember. 2 weeks after the arrests, Linda called me from the county jail. I almost didn't answer. But something in me, maybe the part that still remembered being 4 years old and watching her leave for her night shift, her scrubs wrinkled and her eyes tired, made me pick up. She didn't apologize. She didn't ask how I was. She said, you set this up. You knew I would do this. You planned the whole thing. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot, watching the sunset turn the sky a bruised purple. No, I said. I hoped you wouldn't. I set up the LLC because I knew you could. There's a difference. You could have just told me no. You could have hidden the apartment some other way. You wanted this to happen. I wanted to be safe, I said. If my safety feels like a trap to you, that tells me everything I need to know about how you see me. She started crying, the kind of crying that used to work on me, the ragged, desperate sound of a woman who has always used her pain as a tool. I used to crack every time. I used to rush in, fix it, pay for it, absorb it. Not anymore. I love you, Elena. Everything I did was because I love you. You love what I provide, I said. That's not the same thing. I hung up. I sat in the silence for a long time. Then I drove to my apartment. Paul had been forced to halt renovations pending the fraud investigation. The generic gray paint was still on my walls. The new carpet still covered my hardwood floors. But the lease was void. The deed was back in the LLC's name, exactly where it had been before Linda decided my life was hers to liquidate. I walked through the empty rooms. The ceramic poles were gone. The bookshelves were gone. My grandmother's ceramic birds, the ones she'd painted by hand in her kitchen in Santurce, were in a landfill somewhere. Those couldn't be recovered. No legal proceeding, no amount of restitution, would bring back the yellow bird with the chipped wing that I'd held the night my grandmother died. Some things, once taken, stay taken. But the apartment was mine. The walls would get new paint, the shelves would get rebuilt, the kitchen would get new handles, maybe not the same ones, but ones I chose. Mine. I changed the locks that night. The locksmith was a quiet man who didn't ask questions. When he finished, he handed me 2 new keys and a receipt. I closed the door behind him and stood in the empty living room, listening to the building settle around me. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed on the street below. Someone in the apartment above me was playing music, something soft and acoustic that filtered through the ceiling like a lullaby. I wasn't happy. Happiness was a renovation I hadn't started yet. But I was safe. For the first time in years, no one was coming to take what I'd built. No one was going to call at midnight with a crisis that was really a shakedown. No one was going to look at my life and see a resource to be harvested. I was not anyone's emergency fund anymore. I sat on the floor, my back against the wall, and closed my eyes. The apartment smelled like paint and new carpet, like someone else's choices layered over mine. But underneath it, if I breathed deeply enough, I could still smell the wood of the old floors. The bones of the place were still mine. Everything else could be rebuilt. If you've ever had to become the villain in someone else's story just to protect yourself, share this. And if you're the family member who's always expected to sacrifice, who's always the first one called when someone else's chaos needs funding, hear me when I say this. A locked door is not cruelty. A boundary is not betrayal. And choosing yourself is not the same as abandoning anyone else. It's the beginning of the only rescue that actually works, the one where you save yourself.